The thing itself, which is just across the courtyard, looks very much at home. And I was able to confirm today that not only is this jukebox the first one in all of France, but it is also the first one in the world to operate on this new crank handle system. So it needs no external electricity supply to operate it. And in keeping with this very first um, um, set of poems, curation of poems, which is all themed on climate change, that's really quite something. So a first on two counts for Centre Culturel Irlandais. It takes a team to deliver a project like this, and I have the joy really of being the front face, but there are many contributors along the way, unsung people such as the genius, that is Andrei Kobza, an artist and an entrepreneur in the Czech Republic who conceptualized and invented the Poetry Jukebox. And I appreciate very much that we on the island of Ireland have benefited so much from this outward facing international collaboration. We are a nation of poets, and poetry jukeboxes enable us to make poetry available in public spaces. Listening is one of our most primal senses. We don't have earlids and we can't shut our ears off. Even in the womb, we are listening. Through hearing, we become more sentient beings. The child in utero hears the mother's heartbeat, and later ambient sounds from the outside world filter to that other inner universe. I have two daughters, and they're both adults now, but I remember distinctly those anxious moments postpartum waiting for them to begin to bawl, to protest their dramatic change in circumstances and that brutal, if natural, entry to the world apart from me and separate for the first time. I never lost my mother's ear and was always roused easily from sleeping, and even now I can differentiate infant cries, pain, tiredness, hunger, and what we termed, "I'll carry on." Babies are quick to employ sounds to evoke patterns of response. Later, on long car journeys, I was subjected to macabre and shocking, if naive, questions. So you may brace yourself. Mum, if you had to burn to death or freeze to death, what would you rather have? Or, Mum, if you had to be deaf or had to be blind, what would you rather have? They are interesting existential questions, and interesting too for bringing hearing foreground. So context matters, but so does point in time. And sounds create memories which are hardwired. As a young child, I heard and remember still the sounds of riots that marked some distance, the sequelae of civil rights movement in the early days of the Troubles. Sounds of trouble, fear, anger, and conflict carried and amplified over Lough Erne. The sounds of my parents' rowing, filtering up through the house from downstairs. And there were other sounds, those of despair, of compromise, of pragmatism, of continuing. Children playing underpinned by a drone of helicopters. And then there were the sounds of industrial blasting at the quarry near our home, distinguishable from other blasts by intensity, the direction from which the sound came, timing, expected and routine, or random and odd. Sounds that were not the right tenor, displacing the air jaggedly and crackling as opposed to the rounded boom of something more controlled, diffused, neutered. And shots. Shots from rifles differ from pistols, differ from machine guns, differ from rocket launchers, differ from the precise and measured rattle of a setup to scare crows from crops. There were warm and rounded, low and familiar greetings from hungry horses in the morning, impatient and anticipating being fed. Even the dogs, never off duty and constantly alert, had a code of sound. One register for strangers and another entirely for someone from the family, a patterning of guttural barks, greetings of whimpers and yelps. This is it. Sound is code, and that which is said can carry less weight than that which is unsaid. And the silence in between is not nothing. Silence is not an absence of sound. It occupies a mystical, potent, strange, and varied territory of its own. Think contented silence, reflective and spiritual silence, sullen silence, stoic silence, conspiratorial silence, guilty, reflective silence, the silence of terror or that which struggles to find language to articulate our most intimate suffering, like the silence of grief. Joy has its own silence. Sometimes there is nothing to be said. Abundance is filled with satisfaction and with enough. But words matter. The human voice is loaded with data even before we pay attention to listening to a single word. Think how much we deduce and learn from the other just from the accent, pitch, intonation, volume, tone, fluency, modulation, articulation, and rhythm. Before we listen to a single word, a sentence, the give and take of dialogue, and before we pay attention to the speaker, to differentials of power, of affirmation, and of what it is actually being said. We live in a world cluttered with noise, with stimuli of all manner, and within this clamour, we struggle then to listen to each other and to our own selves. Poetry, then, has a difficult time to be heard among all this, and for all of that, it becomes more and more urgent to do so. Poetry has always been both oral and aural in its art form, and was so long before it was ever written down in order to be shared. Poems speak to our most intimate selves. There is a chance to enjoy a pool of quietness within the day, or to engage with our imagination, with imagery, ideas, and possibility. The poem offers the possibility to interrupt the inner world. At the very same moment, it brings coherence and, paradoxically and magically, expansion. The new and familiar, cheek by jowl, parallel realities that both chime and simultaneously compete. This is the mystery and the miracle of poetry. And what I love about this project, and it is my great privilege to work on it, is that it brings the words and work, the true vocation of the poet, out of its silo and puts it where it belongs, which is everywhere, for everybody. Here, the everyman might stumble upon the vital instinct, the clear insight, the distilled wisdom, the message from the gods, the point of view that expands the world just enough so that surprise, delight, enlightenment, joy, necessary alarm, and imagination slip through a minuscule crack in the everyday clamour. In this way, we become emboldened within our better selves, or acquire, as if it were Bridget's enchanted cloak, a necessary shield. Elizabeth Alexander said, "Poetry is a force field against despair," and I believe her. The American poet Mary Oliver said, "Poetry is not just words after all, but fires for the cold, ropes let down to the lost, something as necessary as bread in the pockets of the hungry." Audre Lorde said, "Poetry is not a luxury." She went on, "Poetry is not only dream and vision, it is the skeleton architecture of our lives. It lays the foundations for a future of change, a bridge across our fears of what has never been seen before." Since 2017, we've had the first Poetry Jukebox on the island of Ireland in Belfast. Belfast and the north of Ireland and its people isn't exactly renowned for its genteel sensibilities. We have a bit of a reputation for many of the wrong reasons, much of which is sadly apt. We are known for our capacity to hurt and be hurt, for our struggle to say the right words in the right way at the right time, to be silent in a way that supports the better side of ourselves and which brings out the best in the other. But I don't have to tell you this, for you know it, and many of you know it intimately. It is a strange and satisfying act of rebellion to amplify quiet voices, to put beautiful, imaginative, and evocative words into public space, to take a swipe at bigotry, nihilism, and a destructive narrative, not with rhetoric, but with being the difference instead. As of about now, I can tell you that our Poetry Jukebox has been a presence of poetic language, imagination, and possibility for 843 days. I'm told that's a semi-prime number, though I don't actually really understand what a semi-prime number is. But this equates to 72,860,400 seconds, or 1.2 million 14,340 minutes, or 20,239 hours of beauty. We are delighted to be partnering with Centre Culturel Irlandais. We're grateful to the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, the British Council, Belfast City Council, and Poetry Ireland for their support of this climate change curation. And I congratulate CCI on joining the Poetry Jukebox family. As Professor Lucy Collins of UTCD proclaimed via Twitter, poetry, égalité, fraternité. My colleague and fellow poet Stephen Sexton, worked with me to select this inaugural curation of poems for Centre Culturel Irlandais. He has written a beautiful article for the Irish Times Online about this particular curation, Once Barefoot, which is celebrating the blue planet that we call home. So I fully encourage you to look for that online and read what he has to say about the specific references to the range of poets that we have on there. There are people like Paula Meehan, Sinead Morrissey, Maureen Boyle, Kathleen Jamie, Celia Defrenia, and many, many other poets, all with their distinct and beautiful take on the crisis that we face, but also those things that are worth saving. So with that, I really don't have anything more to say except enjoy this Poetry Jukebox. Appreciate the fact that it is the first in the world that can be wound up and operate on human energy. It's a first for our Czech partners. It's a first for France. It's a first for CCI. and welcome to the Poetry Jukebox family. We certainly are privileged to be working with you and look forward to working with you in the years to come as well, as we change and update those collections of poems.